Most nights, the world feels quieter once you step out into a dark parking lot. The air settles differently, carrying the faint echo of distant traffic and the soft buzz of lights that never fully turn off. Cars sit in long, calm rows, their windows reflecting whatever sliver of moonlight manages to slip between the clouds, and there's a strange comfort in how ordinary it all seems. You open your door, set your things down, and sink into the familiar space of your seat without thinking twice, feeling the cool fabric beneath you and the gentle tick of the cooling engine if the car's been sitting a while. It's the kind of moment where you breathe a little slower than usual, convinced you're the only person awake in that small pocket of night. But sometimes the quiet carries something else, a small sound you can't place, like the rustle of fabric when there shouldn't be any or the faintest shift of weight that doesn't match your own movements. Maybe it's the way the air inside the car feels slightly warmer than expected, or the way the rearview mirror catches a shadow that wasn't there a moment ago. It's subtle enough to ignore at first, easy to blame on the lighting or a long day or the way your imagination stretches in the dark. Yet the unease settles in your chest all the same, slow and steady, like a reminder you almost recognized before brushing it aside. And by the time you realize that something in that moment doesn't belong, that you're not as alone as you thought, the night has already changed. The car no longer feels like the safe, familiar space you trust, and every reflection in the glass seems to hold a question you hesitate to answer. These are the stories of the people who didn't notice right away, who only discovered the presence behind them once it was too late to take back the moment they got inside. Let's begin. I'd been working late shifts that winter, the kind that left the parking lot mostly empty by the time I finally stepped outside. The cold always hit me first, that sharp, clean air that wrapped around my coat and made each breath feel strangely louder in the quiet. My car sat under one of the flickering lights near the back, and as usual I walked toward it with my hands tucked into my pockets, listening to the crunch of salt and gravel under my shoes. There was nothing unusual about that night at first. Everything felt tired and predictable. The faint hum of the street lamp, the distant echo of a snowplow on the far side of the building, the soft frost forming along the edges of my windows. I remember thinking how much I looked forward to the heater warming up my hands once I got inside. When I opened the driver's door, a small puff of cold air drifted out, carrying that familiar scent of old upholstery and leftover coffee from the morning. I sat down, shut the door, and let the world outside fall into muffled silence. The inside of the car felt tighter than usual because of the temperature difference, that strange moment where sound becomes thick before everything settles. I stuck the key into the ignition, and as the engine turned over, the vibration sent a small ripple through the seats. It was then, in that split second of warming air and shaking fabric, that I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. A faint shift. The kind of shadow that disappears before your brain can process whether it was real. I tried ignoring it. I chalked it up to exhaustion or the flicker of the overhead light through the rear window. But when the heater fan kicked on and the cabin filled with that low, steady hum, the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. The air behind me felt different, not warmer, not colder, just occupied, in a way I didn't have language for. I adjusted the rearview mirror lazily, pretending I was just checking it out of habit, but what I really wanted was to reassure myself that nothing was there. The reflection looked normal at first, just the dim shape of the back seat and the outline of my jacket thrown to one side, nothing strange, no movement. And yet, the longer I stared into the mirror, the more I noticed that a section of the back seat looked darker than it should have. I blinked and sat up straighter. The darkness didn't shift or dissolve. It held, A slow, prickling unease crawled across the back of my neck as I leaned slightly to the left and then to the right, testing whether the shadow was just a trick of the angle. That was when I saw it just for a second, the faintest curve of something pale behind the driver's headrest, like a cheekbone or a forehead catching the tiniest bit of light. I froze. My breath faltered mid-inhale. The engine hummed beneath me while the heater blew warm air over my hands, but everything behind me felt unnaturally still. Too still. I didn't whip around. I didn't make any sudden moves. Something inside me understood immediately that whatever was in the back seat didn't want to be acknowledged yet, or maybe I didn't want to acknowledge it myself. My pulse thumped heavy in my ears as I pretended to adjust the vents, trying to steal another glance in the mirror without looking afraid. But the mirror was angled wrong now, reflecting only part of the backrest. I couldn't see the dark shape anymore. I couldn't tell if I had imagined it or if it was sinking deeper into the seat. The parking lot felt quieter than before. The flickering light outside stopped flickering. Even the distant snowplow noise seemed to vanish. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused, waiting for me to do something. I considered opening the door and stepping back out, but the idea of turning my back on whatever was behind me made my stomach twist. My hand hovered over the gear shift instead, and I debated whether to drive forward quickly, maybe turn toward a more populated street or a store that stayed open late. I wasn't panicking yet, but my senses were sharpening in a way I hadn't felt since childhood, that old instinct that something was very wrong. I tried one more time to tilt the mirror downward. This time the angle slid too far and the mirror caught the faint reflection of something sitting directly behind me. A face, not fully illuminated, not clear enough to identify, but unmistakably human. The skin was pale, the jaw slack, the eyes half-lidded as though the man behind me hadn't decided whether to look at me yet. He wasn't breathing loudly. He wasn't shifting in his seat. He was simply sitting there with a stillness that felt unnatural for someone alive. My hand slipped off the mirror, and for a terrifying second the movement nearly made me gasp. I didn't know what to do. Every option felt too risky. If I turned around, he could react. If I opened the door, he could grab me. If I drove off, who knew what he'd do once the doors locked automatically? The heater clicked softly as it switched speeds, and the sudden change made me flinch. I watched the mirror again, or tried to, but the angle had shifted too much to see him clearly again. Still, I knew he was there. I could feel it in the air pressing against my spine. I tried speaking without sounding like I was speaking to him, just a soft, shaky exhale that might have passed for me talking to myself. "Okay, let's go," I murmured, barely audible. My hand moved slowly, painfully slowly, toward the unlock button. I didn't press it, I just wanted my fingers near it. Then, with every ounce of caution I had, I placed the car into drive. The moment the gear clicked, I heard it, the softest sound, like fabric shifting or someone adjusting their posture slightly. It confirmed what I already knew. He had been waiting for movement, waiting for a signal. I didn't accelerate hard. I let the car roll forward gently, as though nothing at all was wrong. My entire body buzzed with adrenaline, but my face stayed as neutral as I could make it. I turned onto the main road, hands trembling so lightly I hoped he couldn't see it. I kept my eyes on the street, watching the yellow glow of lamps slide across the hood. The entire drive felt like walking a tightrope. Every second I expected him to speak or lean forward or reach out, but he didn't. He stayed perfectly, unnervingly motionless behind me. When I finally reached a gas station, one that stayed busy even at night, I pulled in slowly, trying not to make it obvious that I was heading toward people. I parked near the front door where the cashier could see me through the glass. Then, with a breath I barely managed to take, I threw the door open and stepped out fast, slamming it shut before he could react. As I stumbled backward, staring at the car, heart pounding so violently it hurt. The back seat remained dark. The figure didn't move. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if he'd slipped down or ducked behind the seats. I pointed at the car and yelled for help inside the station. Two people came out with me. One grabbed the door handle and swung it open. The lights inside flicked on. Oh, he was gone. No open doors. No footprints in the fresh frost. No signs he had ever been there except the imprint on the seat, a small, unmistakable dip in the fabric where someone had been sitting moments earlier. The police searched the area but found nothing. They questioned whether I was sure I saw someone, whether I had been tired or jumped at a shadow. But I know what I saw. I know the weight of another person in the car. I know the sound of someone shifting in the back seat. What haunts me most isn't that he disappeared. Oh, it's the stillness. It's the perfect, deliberate stillness of someone who had been waiting long before I ever reached the door. Someone who knew how to sit until he was ready to move. And someone who left without making a sound, not because he panicked, but because he decided he wasn't done yet. Just done with me. I've always liked doing my grocery runs late at night. The store near my apartment stays open until midnight, and something about walking through nearly empty aisles feels peaceful after a long day. The fluorescent lights hum softly overhead, steady and predictable, and the shelves sit quiet without the usual rush of people brushing past each other. That night, the air outside had a cool bite to it, making my breath fog a little as I pushed my cart toward the car. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered vehicles sitting under the orangish glow of street lamps, and the silence made every small sound, my keys jingling, my shoes brushing asphalt, echo more than usual. It wasn't a bad feeling, just the kind that makes you more aware of your surroundings in a way that feels grounding. I popped open the back door and loaded the bags into the seat behind me, listening to the faint rustle of plastic as they settled against each other. The sound seemed louder than usual in the quiet, but I didn't think much of it. I closed the door and slid into the driver's seat, feeling that small, familiar chill inside the car before the heater kicks in. When I started the engine, the dashboard lit up in a warm glow, and I exhaled slowly, grateful to be done for the night. As I reached over to adjust the air vents, the fan clicking softly as warm air began to trickle through. That was when I heard it, a faint, almost delicate sound behind me. At first, it blended into the noise of shifting bags and the hum of the heater. A soft inhale, then a gentler, controlled exhale. I froze, my fingers hovering near the vent dial. The sound was so quiet it could have been fabric settling or air moving through the car's interior. But something about it felt too rhythmic, too intentional. I told myself it was just the bags collapsing or maybe the seat creaking from the temperature change. I lifted my hand and adjusted the mirror, glancing quickly at the back seat. All I saw was the pale outline of grocery bags and a shadow cast by the headrest. Nothing strange, nothing moving. As I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and shifted into reverse. But as I backed out of the space, I heard it again. Another soft inhale, followed by a slow, warm exhale, almost like someone trying to breathe quietly. As the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, I turned the radio off instinctively, as if the silence would help me understand what I was hearing. My throat tightened a little as I eased onto the road that circled the parking lot. The air inside the car felt subtly warmer than when I first got in, like someone else's body heat was mixed with mine. I brushed the thought away, but the unease grew sharper when I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. The back window had a faint, uneven fog pattern in the corner, one that didn't match my breathing. My breath clouded the driver's side of the glass. This fog sat lower, near the spot where someone's head would be if they were trying to hide behind the seat. I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse beating just under my jaw. I didn't want to turn around. Something in me said not to. Instead, I focused on the mirror, watching for the slightest movement. The bags behind me rustled softly when I turned onto the road leading out of the lot, but the way they shifted felt weighted, like the pressure behind them wasn't from gravity alone. I drove slowly, trying to convince myself that fear was making me see patterns in nothing. But the fog on the window thickened slightly as I exhaled, and for a moment I wondered if I had left the window cracked. I hadn't. When I stopped at the first red light, the car seemed to go unnaturally quiet. The heater hummed low and steady, and I sat perfectly still, listening. That was when I heard it clearly, no mistaking it this time. A quiet, controlled breath drawn in gently and released just as softly as though someone was trying very hard not to be heard. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My eyes flicked to the mirror again. And that was when I noticed it. A slight shape in the back seat, just barely visible in the dim reflection. Not a full silhouette, not enough to make out features, but enough to see the curve of a head leaning slightly forward. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I didn't even take a deep breath. I stared into the mirror with a kind of slow dread curling through my chest. The shape wasn't moving, but the uneven fog on the window continued, inhale, exhale, slower than mine, deeper than mine. I tried thinking of the safest thing to do. Driving home was out of the question. Pulling over in a dark place was worse. The nearest safe spot I could think of was a gas station a few blocks away, one that stayed brightly lit and usually had a few people around. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas gently, trying to keep my breathing steady so whoever was behind me wouldn't sense the shift in energy. As I approached the gas station, I felt another faint rustle behind me, not loud, not hurried, just enough to confirm there was a person back there trying to stay low. The shadow in the mirror dipped slightly as if someone was adjusting their position. I forced myself to drive calmly, pulling into the station and choosing a pump directly under the brightest light. The moment the car stopped, I unbuckled slowly, watching the mirror the entire time. The shadow remained still. I cracked the door open without hesitation and stepped out quickly, leaving the door wide so anyone watching would know something was off. I didn't run, I didn't want to draw attention to myself, but I walked with purpose toward the entrance of the store, keeping my eyes on the car from the corner of my vision. When I reached the glass doors and stepped inside, the cashier glanced up. I must have looked shaken because he straightened, ready to ask something. Before he could, I pointed back to my car and whispered that someone was inside it. He didn't question me. He stepped out from behind the counter and came closer to the windows with me. From that distance, the back seat was still out of sight. But then we saw movement, a slow, deliberate shifting as a woman sat up from behind the passenger seat. Now, she wasn't surprised. She didn't flinch. She simply rose to a sitting position, her shoulders slumped, her hair falling messily over her face. She looked directly toward the gas station windows as though she knew exactly where I was standing. And then she smiled, softly, but wrong in a way I still struggle to explain. The cashier stepped outside cautiously, brandishing a phone. As soon as he approached the car, the woman slid out the opposite door and disappeared into the darkness behind the station without a single word. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She moved like she had done this before. The police searched the area for an hour but found nothing. When they asked me to describe her, I tried. But there had been something strangely unremarkable about her features. like her face was familiar only in the way strangers on a bus seem familiar when you're too tired to focus. The officers exchanged a look at one point and mentioned quietly that they'd had similar calls in the last month. Reports of a woman slipping into unlocked cars, hiding without speaking, always leaving before she could be confronted. It's been months since that night, but sometimes I still hear that soft, controlled breathing in my memory, the way it synchronized with my fear, the way it stayed perfectly quiet until I started driving. I always lock my doors now before I unload groceries. I always check the back seat before I start my engine. And sometimes, when I walk through that same parking lot late at night, I catch myself listening for the faintest inhale behind me, just in case she's still out there, moving from car to car, waiting for another person who doesn't notice the warmth of someone else's breath until it's too late. I borrowed my sister's car the week this happened because mine was in the shop for a minor repair. She didn't mind, she almost never used her car during the work week, and I only needed it to get to my job on the other side of town. The first morning I drove it, the air was cold enough that the windshield fogged from the inside, creating that thin veil of moisture you have to wipe with your sleeve before turning on the defroster. The car smelled faintly of her lavender air freshener and something sweet, maybe the remnants of a spilled drink her kids had dropped. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Just a familiar, slightly cluttered environment that made me feel like I was borrowing a piece of her routine. It was still early, not quite sunrise, and everything around me felt slow and quiet in that way mornings do when the world hasn't fully woken up. As I backed out of her driveway, my headlights swept across the interior for a moment, illuminating the back seat. That was when I saw the footprint, just one. A dusty mark on the floor mat behind the passenger seat. It wasn't a big deal. I assumed it belonged to one of my nephew's friends or maybe her youngest, who loved climbing into the car through any door except the one he was supposed to use. I didn't think twice about it. Kids leave messes. That's just how it is. But something about the placement caught my attention for a moment longer than it should have. The footprint wasn't smudged or messy like a child's would be. It looked clean, deliberate, like someone had stepped in carefully. I shrugged it off, told myself it wasn't worth thinking about this early in the morning, and pulled onto the main road. The drive felt normal enough at first. The heater kicked in with that faint, dusty smell older cars sometimes have, and the radio crackled quietly until I found a station playing soft morning news. The roads were mostly empty except for the occasional delivery van or early commuter. But a few miles in, I began noticing small sounds inside the car, subtle shifting noises that didn't match the movement of the vehicle. A soft thump now and then. A hush of fabric against fabric. At first, I blamed it on the grocery bags my sister kept in the trunk or maybe something rolling around under one of the seats. But the sounds didn't feel random. They felt spaced out, intentional in a way that pricked at my nerves, like someone adjusting themselves very slowly. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror without meaning to. The back seat looked exactly the same each time, the booster seat on one side, my sister's work tote on the other, a stray sweater draped over the middle. Nothing moved. The single dusty footprint remained on the mat, quiet and harmless. Yet every time I drove over a slight bump or turned a corner, I swore I felt the weight in the car shift a little more than expected. Not enough to prove anything, but enough that my awareness kept drifting back there. By the time I reached the long stretch of road leading downtown, my chest felt a little tight from the tension I was pretending not to have. The sun was barely beginning to rise, casting that soft blue-gray light across the buildings. The city was waking up slowly, pedestrian signals blinking to life, coffee shops flipping on their signs, I tried to ground myself in the normalcy of it. But then I heard it again, a soft exhale not coming from me. A faint, low sigh like someone trying not to breathe too loudly. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I turned the radio off so I could listen better. The silence inside the car grew heavy, suffocating almost. I listened. 1 second, 2 seconds, three. And then so quietly it made my skin prickle, I heard a faint shift in the back seat, not the sound of an object sliding, but the subtle rustle of someone adjusting their arm or shoulder. My heartbeat pounded against the inside of my ribs. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to look into the mirror just yet. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think. As a part of me tried to rationalize all of it. Maybe something had fallen back there in the footwell. Maybe the car was just old and making noise. But none of those explanations matched the pattern of breathing I kept hearing in the quiet moments. And then I remembered the footprint, not smeared, not small, not belonging to a child. One clean, adult-sized footprint pressed into the mat. My palms started sweating slightly as I finally forced myself to adjust the rearview mirror just an inch, enough to catch more of the back seat without making it obvious I was checking. At first, all I saw was the tote bag and the booster seat, the sweater, the headrest. Nothing moved, but the longer I watched, the more I noticed a shape behind the driver's seat, a darker mass tucked low near where the floor meets the back cushion. It wasn't clear, it wasn't well defined, but it wasn't nothing. My breath grew shallow, and for a moment I felt a cold ripple race up my spine. I wanted to pull over, I wanted to get out, but the road I was on had no shoulder, just concrete barriers and narrow lanes leading toward the city center. I couldn't stop safely. I couldn't even slow down without risking someone honking and drawing attention to me. My heart thudded faster with each passing second. I kept glancing at the mirror in tiny, almost imperceptible shifts, watching that dark shape for any sign of movement. And then I saw it, a hand. A pail partially hidden by the seat, fingers curling slowly as if testing the space. A wave of nausea washed over me. I swallowed it down and kept driving, pretending nothing was wrong. The hand didn't rise, it didn't grab, it just retreated back into the shadow. The breathing continued, quiet, steady, almost patient. Maybe he thought I hadn't noticed. Maybe he expected me to drive somewhere more isolated. The next intersection was coming up, a major one near a police substation. The light was green, but I flicked my turn signal on anyway, moving toward the lane that would take me directly past the building. As I approached, I intentionally slowed down to an almost awkward degree, making it look like I was searching for an address or unsure of my turn. I hoped whoever was behind me wouldn't guess what I was about to do. When I finally pulled into the substation's parking lot, my hands shook so badly it took 2 tries to put the car in park. I didn't turn off the engine. I didn't look back. I opened the door quickly and stepped out, backing away from the car as discreetly as I could. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked fast toward the station entrance. Inside, it took me a moment to explain what was happening. I think I stuttered through half of it before the officer at the desk understood the urgency in my voice. 2 officers walked outside with me, one approaching the driver's side, the other circling toward the rear. But when they opened the back door, there was no one there. No man crouched behind the seat. No impressions on the upholstery. No sign of movement or forced entry. The only evidence that anything had been there at all was that single dusty footprint, with the one adult-sized mark pressed neatly into the floor mat behind the passenger seat. The officers tried reassuring me, suggesting maybe it had been left earlier and the sounds had been normal car noises. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know the weight of another person when they breathe in a confined space. When my sister picked up her car later that day, I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to scare her. But she asked me one question that still chills me when I think about it. She frowned at the footprint and said, "That's strange, my kids haven't sat on that side in weeks." Sometimes, when I'm alone in my own car now, I still check the back seat before I start driving. And sometimes, even when I'm sure it's empty, I can't help listening for the faintest shift or the softest breath, wondering if I'll ever know who left that footprint and how long they were sitting just inches behind me before I realized they weren't supposed to be there. I was working the late shift at the diner that winter, the kind of shift where the air feels colder walking out than it did when you walked in, even though only a few hours passed. The restaurant sat off a quiet road near the edge of town where most of the surrounding shops closed early. When I stepped outside that night, the wind rattled the loose metal signage on the building next door, creating a thin metallic tapping that echoed faintly across the parking lot. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders as I walked toward my car, the gravel crunching in a steady rhythm under my shoes. It was one of those moments you don't think twice about: end-of-day silence, a tired body, a warm car waiting. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just the normal routine of leaving work long after everyone else had gone home. My car sat under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, the kind that buzzes softly like a trapped insect. I opened the driver's door, tossed my jacket into the back seat without looking, and settled into the cold interior. The seat felt stiff from the temperature, and the air smelled faintly like old coffee and winter air. I turned the key, listening to the low rumble of the engine come to life. As the cabin slowly warmed, I reached back to grab my jacket, intending to pull it over my lap for a little extra warmth. My fingers barely brushed it before I paused, confused. The jacket felt heavier than it should have, not weighted down by anything I'd left in the pockets, but as if it were draped over something solid. I frowned and glanced into the rearview mirror. All I could see was a dark shape under the jacket, but the back seat itself was dim, making it hard to tell what I was looking at. I assumed the jacket had bunched up over my work bag or maybe over some containers I'd forgotten I stored back there. I reached again, this time pushing the jacket a little to the side. That was when I felt it, not the soft give of fabric, but something firm beneath it, unmoving and oddly rounded. Something that felt like a shoulder or a knee. A slow discomfort crawled up my spine. I pulled my hand back quickly and stared into the mirror once more, adjusting the angle slightly. The dim reflection shifted just enough for me to notice that the jacket wasn't lying flat at all. It was draped over an unmistakable shape, curved, solid, and strangely still. For a moment, I told myself it had to be my bag. Maybe it had fallen sideways. Maybe I'd placed it wrong. But the shape was higher than my bag ever sat, rising almost to the height of someone curled tightly behind the seat. And as I stared, the street lamp flickered overhead, casting a faint shimmer across what I could swear was the outline of a forehead beneath the jacket's edge. My pulse quickened, though my body stayed frozen. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in me knew the mirror was safer than facing whatever was there directly. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield slightly as I let the car idle, trying to listen for any sound behind me. The heater clicked softly. The engine hummed. And beneath those sounds, almost blending in, I heard the slightest shift, fabric brushing against itself, like someone adjusting their weight just a little too slowly. I swallowed, keeping my breathing shallow. I didn't want whoever was back there, if someone was back there, to know I had noticed them. My hand moved casually toward the gear shift, though it trembled slightly despite my best effort to stay composed. I eased the car into drive, acting like nothing was wrong, forcing my face to remain neutral. If someone was hiding, I didn't want to startle them before I had a plan. The diner parking lot stretched out in front of me, empty and wide. A familiar road led toward the highway on one end and toward the residential streets on the other. I chose neither. Instead, I steered the car slowly toward the gas station at the intersection, the only place still lit up at this hour. I kept glancing into the mirror with controlled, subtle movements. The shape didn't rise. It didn't shift again. The jacket remained draped over it, unmoving, like someone trying very hard to stay small and quiet. The gas station came into view, its bright fluorescent lights spilling across the pavement. I pulled up to a pump closest to the entrance where I knew the cashier could see me. The car rolled to a smooth stop, and the moment it did, I turned off the engine but left the keys in the ignition. My hand paused on the handle for half a second, just long enough that I worried the hesitation might be noticeable, and then I pushed the door open in one swift motion. The crisp air hit me immediately as I stepped out. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to walk toward the station door without looking back. Not yet. Not until I knew I was somewhere safe. When I reached the entrance, the cashier glanced up from behind the counter, giving me that polite nod you give someone who looks more tired than anything else. But something in my expression must have betrayed the fear I was trying to contain, because his brows knit together, and he opened his mouth to say something. Before he could, I pointed toward my car through the large glass windows. "Oh, there's someone in the back seat," I whispered, barely forming the words. He didn't question me. He stepped out from behind the counter, signaling me to stay inside. I pressed my back against the cool glass and watched as he approached the driver's side door cautiously, pausing to peer inside. He opened the door. The jacket slumped forward, falling off the seat. There was no one there. The back seat was empty, impossibly empty, the upholstery smooth, except for the faint indentation where something or someone had definitely been pressing down moments earlier. The cashier stepped back, scanning the area as if expecting someone to appear beside the car. But the lot was deserted, the street quiet, the only movement the flutter of a paper cup drifting across the sidewalk. The police arrived after he called them, and they searched the car, the parking lot, even the small alley behind the gas station. Nothing, no footprints, no forced entry, no sign anyone had been inside the vehicle at all. They asked if I might have left something under the jacket without remembering. I told them no. I knew what I'd felt. I knew the weight beneath the fabric wasn't a bag or a container. When my sister picked up the car a few days later, I finally told her what happened. She went pale and admitted something she hadn't mentioned before the week prior. She'd found the jacket draped strangely in the back seat after a grocery run, with her tote bag pushed aside as if someone had been lying across it. She assumed her kids had been messing around and forgot to mention it. That footprint I'd found in the other story was one thing, but this was different. Whoever had been hiding beneath that jacket wasn't startled. They weren't rushed. They didn't leave because of me. They left because they knew I was going somewhere public, somewhere bright, somewhere they didn't want to be seen. And sometimes now, when I toss my jacket into the back seat, I hesitate just for a moment, listening for the faintest shift beneath the fabric, wondering if whoever hid there that night is still slipping into unlocked cars, learning the shape of the seat, waiting for the right person to get in. Long road trips used to calm me. There was something soothing about watching long stretches of highway roll beneath the wheels, the sky shifting from bright afternoon to soft evening haze. The day this happened, I had been driving for hours, heading home after visiting a friend 2 states over. By the time dusk settled in, the light outside had taken on that bluish, almost weightless quality that makes everything look slightly softer. The air was cool enough that I kept the windows cracked just a bit to pull in the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. I remember feeling tired in that peaceful, road-weary way, the kind where your shoulders relax and your mind drifts in rhythm with the engine's steady vibration. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt out of place. It was the kind of evening where danger wasn't even a thought in my mind. I pulled into a rest stop just past the state line. It wasn't entirely deserted, but close enough, one truck idling near the exit, a couple of vending machines glowing under a flickering light, and a row of empty parking spaces stretching into the dim. I parked near the far end where it was quietest. The moment I cut the engine, the sudden silence settled thickly around me. I leaned back for a minute, stretching my neck and letting my head rest gently against the headrest. The fabric was cool from the air outside, and the quiet made me feel heavier, sleepier. I took a few sips from my water bottle, listened to the distant hum of the highway, and tried to decide whether I wanted to keep driving or give myself a short break before getting back on the road. It was when I leaned forward to adjust the air vent that I heard it. A faint sound not from outside, not from the engine cooling down, but from inside the car. It was soft, too soft to immediately place. At first, it reminded me of a weak radio signal, one of those half-static murmurs you get when the dial is caught between stations, but the radio was off, and the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It came from behind me, low, quiet, and strangely close. Somewhere near the back of the driver's seat. I paused, confused, holding still for a moment. The sound faded out, leaving only silence. I tried brushing it off. I told myself it had to be the fabric shifting or maybe air moving through the vents after the engine shut off. I started the car again just in case and let it idle, watching the temperature gauge rise as the cabin grew warm. For a minute or two, everything seemed normal. The hum of the engine, the soft click of the AC, the steady glow of the dashboard. I glanced at the mirror and saw only the dark, empty back seat, the travel bag I'd tossed back there earlier, a sweater, and not much else. Then the whisper came again. This time it was clearer, a soft, steady exhale paired with what sounded like the faintest trace of syllables. Not words exactly, more like the shape of someone trying to speak quietly through barely parted lips. The sound drifted upward, brushing the space right behind my left ear. My skin prickled instantly. I froze, breath caught in my throat, eyes locked on the steering wheel. The whisper wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was almost gentle, but it was unmistakably human. My heartbeat thudded hard against my ribs. I didn't turn around, I didn't even move my head. Instead, I shifted just enough to catch the slightest glimpse in the rearview mirror. The headrest blocked most of the view, but I could see the shadow of something behind it, not a sharp, distinct form, but a subtle depth that shouldn't have been there. Like someone's face was inches behind the headrest, positioned low, leaning forward but not fully visible. I swallowed shakily, feeling warmth brush the back of my neck not from the heater but from breath, someone else's breath. Slow, controlled, almost hovering. Instinctively, I inched forward in my seat without making the movement obvious, putting just a little more space between me and the headrest. The whisper followed the distance. A soft, airy murmur that slid along the fabric, almost curious. Every part of me screamed to get out of the car, but I didn't want to startle whoever was back there. I didn't want them to lunge or panic. I kept my breathing shallow, fingers trembling slightly as I reached for the gear shift. I eased out of the parking spot, pulling slowly toward the light of the vending machines. Hopping being in a brighter area would make me feel less trapped. But the whisper didn't stop. It shifted, deepened slightly. as if the person hiding was adjusting their mouth closer to the fabric of the headrest. Halfway across the lot, I made a decision. I jerked the wheel slightly and parked under the brightest light, the kind that buzzed loudly overhead like static pressure. Then, heart pounding, I did something risky. I slid out of the driver's side door as carefully as I could, keeping my head facing forward until I was fully outside, putting the solid weight of the door between me and whatever was inside. The moment my foot hit the parking lot pavement, the whisper cut off sharply. The sudden silence felt colder than the night air. I backed away slowly, staring at the car from the outside, waiting to see movement. The back seat remained dark and still. Nothing shifted, nothing rose. The headrest sat in its usual place untouched. I circled around to the passenger side, keeping my distance. The handle felt icy under my fingers as I cracked the door open. I braced myself. The interior light flicked on. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. My travel bag lay exactly where I left it. My sweater was undisturbed. The fabric of the headrest was smooth, uncreased, with no sign of a face pressed against it. The air inside felt still, undisturbed, except for a faint warmth lingering behind the driver's seat, as if someone had been very close to it only moments earlier. I stood there for a long time, hand on the door, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. I knew breath when I felt it. I knew human whispering when I heard it. And I knew the sensation of someone being so close that you can feel the warmth of their presence even when you can't see them. So eventually, I got back in the car on the passenger side at first, needing a moment before I braved the driver's seat again. I drove the rest of the way home with all the lights on inside and the rearview mirror angled low enough to show everything behind me. Nothing appeared. No whisper returned. But the warmth behind my seat remained for several minutes before fading away like a memory I didn't want. So when I finally told a friend about it weeks later, they laughed nervously and said maybe it was a dream. Maybe I'd been too tired, but I didn't imagine the breath, or the whisper, or the way it matched my movement as I tried to pull away. I didn't imagine the warmth lingering long after the noise stopped. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the car on a long drive, and the cabin is quiet enough that even the engine hum feels distant, I swear I still hear it. A faint murmur brushing the fabric just behind my ear, like someone waiting for the right moment to speak again. I'd gotten into the habit of picking up takeout after work on Thursdays. It became a small ritual that made the long week feel shorter. Drive to the same place, park in the same spot, order the same meal, then head home through quiet streets that always felt a little calmer than the rest of the week. That night, the air outside had cooled just enough that the car windows started to fog around the edges, softening the yellow glow of passing streetlights. I remember feeling unusually tired, the kind of tired where you sink a little too deeply into the seat and let the warmth of the car settle into your shoulders. I rested the takeout bag on the passenger seat, the heat seeping through the paper, filling the small cabin with the smell of spiced rice and grilled chicken. Everything felt normal, familiar, safe. I turned onto the long road that led toward my neighborhood, a stretch lined with dim houses and tall, quiet trees. The kind of road you've driven so many times that you barely notice the details. But that night, maybe because of the fatigue or the silence that seemed heavier than usual, I found myself glancing at the windows more often than I needed to. The light from the passing lamps flickered across my rearview mirror, creating shifting patterns that felt almost hypnotic. At one point, as I slowed near a stop sign, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, a quick tremor of shadow near the back door. I blinked and looked again. Nothing. Just the fog, the street lights, and the faint outline of my own headrest. I brushed it off, probably just the way the condensation changed shape as the heater warmed the glass. But as I turned onto the next street, I heard a faint tapping so soft I almost didn't register it. A gentle, rhythmic sound coming from the back passenger door. It was subtle enough that I could blame it on the road, maybe the takeout container rattling in the bag or a pebble kicking up under the tire. But when the road smoothed out and the tapping continued, almost methodical now, something uneasy settled in my chest. I adjusted the rearview mirror casually, trying to catch a clearer view of the back seat. The interior was dim, lit only by the occasional sweep of streetlights passing overhead. I noticed the condensation again on the back windows, thicker now, blurring the view outside. I told myself it was normal, warm air meeting cold glass, but then I saw it. A pair of eyes staring at me through the fogged child lock window, wide, unblinking. Pressed so close to the glass that the moisture shifted around the shape of the face behind it. My breath caught instantly, the kind of involuntary freeze that makes your ribs tighten. I didn't jerk the wheel, I didn't slam the brakes. I just stared into the mirror, heart pounding slow and heavy as I tried to process what I was seeing. The eyes weren't frantic, they weren't scared. They were focused, watching me with an intent that felt too calm for a stranger hiding in someone else's car. For a split second, I considered the possibility that it was a reflection or a trick of light. But then the eyes blinked. A slow, deliberate blink. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I didn't dare turn around, but I could see enough in the mirror to know the person was crouched low, face nearly pressed to the child lock window as if trying not to be seen but also refusing to look away. I felt the weight of their stare like a pressure at the back of my neck. I tried to breathe normally, forcing air into my lungs without making it obvious that I had seen them. I needed to get somewhere public, somewhere with people, somewhere brightly lit. The closest place was a gas station 2 blocks ahead. I eased my foot onto the accelerator, driving a little faster than usual but not enough to raise suspicion. The tapping sound returned, this time more irregular, like fingers brushing the door panel. I felt my hands start to shake slightly. Every few seconds, I stole glances at the mirror. The eyes stayed locked on me, following each movement of the car, each shift of the wheel. As I neared the gas station, my stomach tightened. What if the person realized where I was going? What if they acted before I could stop? I signaled early, hoping the motion wouldn't alert them. The station lights spilled across the road, bright and artificial, cutting through the dark. I pulled into the nearest pump and stopped the car abruptly, letting the engine idle. Without giving myself time to think, I yanked the door open and jumped out onto the pavement, backing away quickly toward the station doors. My chest was tight, breath coming thin and uneven. The cashier inside looked up the moment he saw my face. I pointed toward my car, words failing me for a second before I finally managed to whisper, "Someone in the back." He stepped out from behind the counter without question, eyes scanning the lot before walking cautiously toward my vehicle. The interior lights had switched on when I exited, illuminating the back seat in a soft yellow glow. I watched from a few feet away, trying to steady my breathing. The cashier approached the rear door, hesitated, then pulled the handle. Well, the back seat was empty. The child lock window was fogged unevenly, as if someone's breath had been pressed against it. A faint handprint smudged the lower edge of the glass, but no one was inside. The cashier looked around the lot quickly, scanning between the pumps and behind the trash bins. The station was empty. The surrounding streets were silent. Whoever had been in my car had slipped out the moment I opened the door, quick, practiced, without a sound. When the police arrived, they searched the area and questioned me gently. They asked if I might have imagined it if maybe someone had leaned against the outside of the car earlier. But the handprint on the inside of the glass said otherwise. And I knew those eyes weren't imagined. You don't forget that kind of stare, steady, intentional, unblinking. The officers explained quietly that there had been reports over the last few weeks. A teenager slipping into unlocked cars at night, hiding in the back seat for reasons no one fully understood. He never spoke, he never attacked anyone. He just watched silently until the driver noticed him or until he had a chance to slip away. They hadn't caught him yet. They didn't know where he came from or how he chose which cars to enter. For days afterward, I kept replaying the moment I saw him, the fogged window, the blink, the eerie stillness of his face. I started locking my doors the second I stepped into any car, even before setting my things down. But sometimes, usually late at night when the world is quiet and my mind starts drifting, I swear I still feel the sensation of eyes watching me through the dark glass behind my shoulder. And every time I stop at a red light or slow near a dim corner, I can't help glancing at the rearview mirror just a little too quickly, afraid I'll see that pale face pressed to the child-lock window again, waiting, silent, as if he never really left. I've always been a morning person, the kind who wakes up before dawn even on days off. There's something peaceful about driving through a city that hasn't quite opened its eyes yet. The quiet, the empty streets washed in pale bluish light, the lingering cold that makes you breathe a little deeper. That morning, I left home earlier than usual because I wanted to stop for coffee before heading to an appointment out of town. The air outside was colder than I expected, the kind that bites your fingers even through gloves, and the windows of my car had fogged over softly. I let the engine run for a minute, watching the condensation swirl in thin patterns across the glass, feeling the stillness sink into me. It was one of those rare moments where I actually felt grateful for the quiet. When I finally pulled out of my driveway, the sun hadn't risen yet. The sky was a bluish gray and a faint mist clung low to the ground. I backed up slowly, noticing the familiar shapes of houses and trees reflected in the rearview mirror. But something about the mirror caught my attention that morning, the faint outline of something in the back seat. At first, I told myself it was just my old blanket, the one I kept there for emergencies. The shape looked bigger than usual, maybe the way it had bunched up overnight. I didn't think too hard about it. I turned my focus to the road, letting the heater warm my hands through the steering wheel. The first 10 minutes of the drive were nothing unusual. I kept the radio low, listening to the soft static between songs, watching the sky lighten slowly with each passing minute. But every so often, my eyes drifted back to the rearview mirror. The shape was still there, a dark curve rising slightly above the backrest. I frowned a little, wondering if the blanket had folded over something else. Maybe a bag I'd forgotten was back there. But what unsettled me was how still it looked. Perfectly still. Like a person sitting upright without moving a muscle. I tried not to let my mind wander. Early morning shadows can play tricks on you, and I reminded myself that tired eyes see patterns that aren't really there. I adjusted the mirror a bit just to give myself a clearer angle. The shift in perspective didn't help. The shape remained exactly where it had been, the silhouette rounded at the top, narrowing at the bottom, not quite a person, but not quite just an object either. I tried to laugh it off quietly, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But the more I stared, the more it felt like someone was sitting there. Not lining, not shifting, not even breathing. The road opened up into a long stretch with no traffic. The stillness inside the car grew heavier. I cracked the window to let a bit of cold air in, hoping it would clear my head. The fresh air made me shiver, but it didn't shake the uneasy tightness forming in my chest. At one point, when I hit a slight bump in the road, everything inside the car shifted, the coffee cup rattled, the coins in the cup holder clinked, but the shape in the back seat didn't move at all. Not even an inch. It held its posture perfectly, as though rooted to the seat itself. A strange, slow dread filled me. I didn't want to turn around. Something in me insisted that if I looked directly at it, whatever was there or wasn't would become too real. So instead, I kept my eyes forward, only glancing at the mirror occasionally. Each time hopping, the shape would be gone. Each time it remained identical, same height, same curve, same unnatural stillness. The morning grew brighter, but the clarity didn't bring comfort. In fact, the more daylight entered the car, the more defined the shape became. It wasn't hazy anymore. It wasn't something easily dismissed as a blanket or a stack of clothes. The outline was smooth, consistent, suspiciously symmetrical, like the silhouette of someone sitting perfectly upright, facing forward, head slightly lowered. I swallowed hard, feeling my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and I felt a cold bead of sweat roll down my spine despite the warmth of the heater. I tried rationalizing it again, but every explanation fell apart. If it was an object, it would have moved with the car. If it was just shadows, they wouldn't stay so still through turns and bumps. If it was a trick of light, why did it look more like a person the longer I looked? Eventually, I reached the overlook, a small pull-off area on the side of the road where people sometimes stop to watch the sunrise. I told myself I was just stopping to stretch, maybe clean the windshield, maybe get some air. Anything to avoid admitting I was terrified of the back seat of my own car. I pulled into the lot and put the car in park. The shape didn't shift, didn't react, didn't do anything except sit there exactly as it had the whole drive. My breaths grew shallow as I reached for the door handle. The air inside felt thick, like I was sharing the space with someone who wasn't breathing. When I pushed the door open, the cold morning air hit me hard, sharp, and grounding. I stepped out quickly, keeping my body turned toward the open space outside, not the back seat. The door creaked softly in the quiet. Only when I'd walked several steps away did I finally force myself to look back into the car. Well, there was a man sitting in the back seat. Not a shadow, not a shape, a man upright still, his hands resting on his knees, his head tilted slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the space directly ahead. He didn't turn toward me. He didn't react to the open door or the sound of my footsteps on gravel or the cold air rushing in. He sat perfectly, unnervingly still, the way he must have sat the entire drive without making a sound. For a long moment, I just stared, my breath visible in the cold air. The man didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe, or if he did, it was too quiet to see. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like a physical force. I couldn't understand how he had gotten into the car. I had locked the doors. I had loaded nothing into the back seat that morning. And yet he'd been there, inches from me, silently watching the road ahead. I called the police from a distance, my voice thin and trembling. When they arrived minutes later, two officers approached the car cautiously. I stood far back, shaking so hard I could barely speak. They opened the rear door. Well, the back seat was empty. The indentation on the seat cushion was fresh, deep, unmistakable, but the man was gone. No footprints in the gravel, no sign of forced entry, no trace he had ever been there except the lingering warmth in the fabric where someone had definitely been sitting. I still don't know how he entered or how he left. I still don't know why he never moved, never spoke, never reacted. But what stays with me most is that feeling I had the moment I saw him, the understanding that he had been watching the road ahead the entire time. Not me, not the mirror, not the world passing by. Just the road. as though he wasn't a hitchhiker or an intruder at all, but someone who had been traveling long before I arrived, and someone who wasn't finished traveling when he left. Now, every time I get into my car early in the morning, I take a long, slow look at the back seat. I check the mirrors twice. I lock the doors 3 times. But sometimes, when the windows fog just right and the light is dim enough, I still see that shape in the corner of my eye sitting perfectly still, waiting for someone to start driving again. Nights like this leave a different kind of silence behind. When the stories end, you start to notice the small things again, the faint hum of whatever room you're in, the quiet exhale you didn't realize you were holding, the way shadows settle just a little heavier than before. These stories remind us how thin the boundary is between feeling safe and realizing you weren't as alone as you thought. Sometimes fear doesn't come from screams or sudden moments. Sometimes it comes from the possibility that someone was already closer than you ever imagined. If you've ever glanced at your mirror a second too long or felt the back seat behind you a little too vividly, you understand the kind of unease that lingers. You don't have to admit it out loud that moment when a shadow looked wrong or a sound seemed too deliberate because most people have had a version of it. That quiet awareness, the one that settles in your chest when your instincts notice something before your mind does. These stories aren't meant to startle you. They're here to keep you company in that strange space where the world feels still, but your thoughts keep drifting. If you want to return for more nights like this, more real stories told softly in the dark, you're welcome to come back. You can subscribe if you want the next set of stories waiting for you when the night gets quiet again, or share this with someone who knows that calm voices can carry the heaviest truths. There's no rush. These stories sit patiently, the same way shadows wait behind your car door or just beyond the mirror. For now, let the night settle around you. Let your breath slow. And before you turn off the light or step outside, maybe take one last gentle look over your shoulder, not out of fear, but out of respect for the things we often sense long before we see. Sleep well if the quiet lets you.